Good afternoon, everyone, and so happy to see you. We are, I'm myself up in the corner, and I'm seeing you, Eileen, as the main speaker. But I will continue. So, welcome to another of AFC's important and informative Zoom meetings, bringing you up-to-date information from the people making news in Israel. I'm Judy Friedman-Kadish, AFC Director of AFC, Americans for a Safe Israel. And first, before we get to OR, a bit about AFC. Just to bring you a little bit up to date, our Chizuk mission to Israel in May was a resounding success. Our band of 23 travelers from all over America, one from Canada, AFC and Texans for a Safe Israel, had an immersive education in the real truth about Israel. We visited the Shomron, the Gaza Envelope, the Dead Sea, Judea, and Jerusalem. We met with officials and with strong, brave, and proud individuals. Together, we were able to gift worthy causes many thousands of dollars. Our next trip is scheduled for early November. Please watch our newsletters, which come out twice a week with the most important news you need to know to stay updated on what's truly happening in Israel. And you'll find our precise dates, and please book your flights as soon as the dates come out. Also, a little pitch for AFC donations. Please, we're asking you to donate to AFC at any level. You just go to afc.org, click on the donate button, and take it from there. Please continue to help us bring you the latest from Israel, send out bi-weekly updates on the most important news from Israel, run our Chizuk missions, and give youth the opportunity to have Shabbatons in Judea and Samaria, where they can have really life-changing experience, seeing what they wouldn't ordinarily see, which is life beyond the green line. And now to today's program. Yissachar is an Israeli Iran expert and Farsi speaker who serves as the Israel Defense and Security Forum Director of Research. That's also known as Habithonistim, for those of you who know it that way. Or founded the David Institute for Policy and Strategy, which is the IDSF's research unit. He regularly briefs Israeli decision makers, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Katz, and other cabinet ministers, leading figures in the IDF and other agencies of the defense establishment, and members of the Knesset. He's drafted papers at the request of Israel's security agencies and government ministries, or served in the famous and well-lauded IDF's 8200 unit. He graduated from Tel Aviv University with a degree in arts and music, focusing on piano performance and musicology. He's just told us he returned from California, where he gave several piano concerts. He's performed on stages in Israel, the United States, and around Europe, and has been awarded several prizes, including first prizes for piano performance and composition. He is such a well-rounded man. He lives in Jerusalem, speaks 5 languages, native level proficiency in English, native Hebrew, French, Persian, and Arabic. We're going to turn the floor over to Or without further ado. Or, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Judy. It's great to be again with AFC. So thank you so much for having me again. Let me just share the slide. Today's theme, Disinformation is Power. As Judy said, my name is Or Yissachar. I'm the director of the David Institute for Policy and Strategy by IDSF. I'm so excited to be back with AFC. So I'm actually in the United States right now. Last time we spoke, I was in Israel. If you remember, the alarm set off while we were talking. And we had quite a time there. This is, quite an experience to be in the United States again. It's been a while, and it's, I'm in DC right now, but going around here, it does give you some perspective. Back home, the wars going on. There is still a lot of unclarity. And I'm happy to talk about that too, and not just disinformation, but it's one of those war efforts that remains hung in the balance as reservists are being called again to serve. My good friend, for example, got married last week, and now he's recruited over in Gaza. So you can see how it impacts Israelis in every level of life. But today I'd like to speak a little bit about disinformation and its effect, because it's very rarely understood just how much we are fighting not just war on the ground, but also the war of information. And very often you hear people say, well, why doesn't Israel do a better hasbara, right? Advocacy. Why are we, it seems like that we're losing. It seems like that the media or international fora or world leaders or whoever this is even profiting off of being anti-Israeli. Somehow this war is not only conducted in Gaza, but also all around the world. I walk around here in DC and I saw some, Palestinian flags and some protests, and and that affects Americans in every way. That there's war in the Middle East, and of course, when visiting Europe, sometimes I got heckled by those protesters, and I can't tell you I complained, because that's a fairly nice cut you can produce from that video to social media. So actually that was a kind of a blessing that these protesters came and I could confront them, and they actually gave me the opportunity to have these great videos. But it does affect us in every way. And I'd like to just start by showing you this dilemma, right? And not to be political, of course, but just to show how you can present things in two different ways. So on the left, you see one way to describe the Alaska summit between President Trump and President Putin. The Washington Post calls it Trump reverses on Ukraine war, ceasefire demand, aligning with Putin, splitting with allies, and a fairly dark vision of it. Well, on the right, you see Fox News calling it tough bargaining, and putting the blame on Zelensky, saying he sets firm peace conditions ahead of meeting with Trump on ending Ukraine war, and praising Trump for his negotiations. Who's right? Well, I'm not going to determine today, but definitely this is the same story portrayed in two different ways. And we see it all the time around us. It applies beyond Israel. It applies everywhere in our lives. And so when we see information on Israel, as in any other case, I think we should be much more skeptic, much more careful. And I'm going to lay out the way I feel, the way I see it, as someone who's Israeli and almost 2 years in this war, and how it affects us in a very basic way. Let's start by a few pictures. So this is a picture of a father in Gaza carrying his poor children against the backdrop of the debris and ruin, and there is the social media saying being a father in Gaza is like this. The only problem is this is not a real picture. This is AI generated picture. You can see, if you look carefully in the center of the picture, I don't know if you can see my cursor, my mouse. All right. These are way too many limbs for two children. So this kid here has 3 toes, not 5. Whose limb is this right here on the left? So this is definitely an AI generated picture, but it has been distributed as real. This is the New York Times, and they used a picture of a kid with severe genetic mutation in order to make the point that there is mass starvation in Gaza deliberately caused by Israel. And this kid, of course, is being treated in Italy. You can see how his mother, you can see here in the picture, his mother looks fairly well fed, not starving. Israel actually, it is thanks to Israel, this kid is out of Gaza and into medical care in Italy. So this is a very bizarre way to accuse Israel of not kidding. This kid could have been an Italian or a British kid being shot in hospital, suffering from severe medical conditions. So this is, of course, there was an apology by the editor, only in the X account that is designated for PR, like press releases, that has 55,000 followers, as opposed to the main account of the New York Times that has 90 million followers. So you can see how it's also a part of the effort to make a certain claim in a loudspeaker and then apologize in page 17, the bottom of the page. Okay, so that's one way to go about it. And of course, there's this. Now, devil always comes as a gentleman. You probably are familiar with that. This stats looks fantastic. These are great infographics that look especially real. All those figures, these infographics, none of it is true. These are official statistics provided by the United Nations, by the UN, and distributed around the world. They are used in parliamentary reports. I heard them even from people around administrations around the world. They are quoted by protesters, including that 20,000 children figure. The only problem is that the source for these claims is the MOH Gaza, the Ministry of Health in Gaza. Who is the Ministry of Health in Gaza? Well, Hamas. And this is a nice, fancy way of saying we're using data provided by Hamas. Well, let me safely assume that this data is far from being reliable, but it is used all over the world by presidents and by the United Nations, and it's used in resolutions when they decide against Israel, and it's used by protesters, and it's used by pundits. I hear it everywhere. These 20,000 children, 60,000 dead, everywhere around the world. And it's false. We don't know how many people were killed in Gaza. And as a matter of fact, one of the most amusing parts about this is that in a war zone, you almost have no casualty on militant death. The only people who seem to be dying in Gaza are women and children. But then, of course, as you can see, there is a very little emphasis on militants as opposed to civilians. And the truth is, we just don't know because it's a war zone, and there are fair estimates. But of course, by definition, we cannot believe any data provided by Hamas. So how does information determine the way we think? Well, I can tell you that there is an ongoing struggle around the world over opinions. And I don't know if you've ever been to Macy's on Black Friday and you see people storming on the $499, Katie Madeleine purse that is a 90% discount, or people storming to be the first to get it. So you know how it looks like. People fight over our opinion all the time, trying to manipulate us. They're trying to make us think that something is bad or something is wrong. They're trying to portray the same thing in various different ways. They use AI-generated pictures and they use professional-looking data. We are being manipulated all the time. And some of these things are fairly innocent. For example, you can make the case that Austria, for example, opened the gates to Palestinians from Gaza, refugees, because it is now providing 5 times more visas than it used to. That's true. The only problem is that now it provided 5 visas as opposed to 1, right? So all of it is true, but you understand how misleading this statement is. You can also make the argument that it is funny. I saw somewhere that J.D. Vance visited the Pope. The day later, he died. What are the odds? For 80 years, this man lived, and then J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, visits him. The following day, he dies. This is true. These are just not related statements. And so people try to apply that to Israel. And you see how you are, and we are, all being manipulated on a daily basis. And this leads to action. You probably know this figure already, that this is the UN resolutions on Israel versus the rest of the world. 85% of all of the resolutions made in the United States Nations General Assembly are bashing Israel. Now, I'm not saying that Israel is above criticism or it's a perfect place, but it certainly doesn't comprise 85% of the world's problems. Certainly not compared to actual war zones, North Korea, China, Zimbabwe, and others. And then you've got the protests, like the ones who heckled at me over in Europe. And you see how in the first year of the war, 1/5, 20% of all the protests around the world were anti-Israel. Around the Gaza war, vast majority of them were anti-Israeli. It is quite shocking because both Israelis and Palestinians are less than 0.2%, 0.19% of the global population. If you look at all of the Israelis and all of the Palestinians who died, who were killed in conflict since the 1980s, this is less than 0.8% of all conflict-related deaths around the world. 0.8%. And then it gets 90% of attention. How come? Okay, you got very small population and relatively very few people dying, as opposed to a lot of attention. Okay? And so what I've come to the conclusion is that portrayal shapes perception. The way you portray people simply shapes the way you think about them. And then in turn, perception spurs policy. So if you want to, let's say you want to defame Israel, let's say you want to make Israel look bad, you started generating all these AI photos, you start describing what Israel is doing in Gaza, not as an effort to defeat Hamas, but as a deliberate genocide. You use the United Nations as a nice professional looking tool in order to generate statistics about the 20,000 children who died. And then you distribute it around the world. And then you keep doing it in a very, very, very high volume until more and more people start believing it. And then the result is that much of what we hear about Israel is negative. Much of what we hear about Israel is negative, to the point where somebody just told me was Israel sympathetic just the other week here in DC. Well, come on, it doesn't make sense that everyone says that Israel carries out deliberate starvation, and it's not true. It has to be true. Everyone says that. And so how do you know that? It's like, haven't you heard? Everyone says that. And that's not an argument, right? You can make the case that Israel is losing the war of information, losing the war of advocacy, which is absolutely true. It still doesn't mean that Israel is wrong. It still doesn't mean that Israel is carrying out genocide or starvation in Gaza. And it's a highly debated political issue, and it has 50 colors of gray between black and white. That's fair. We can argue about it. But what we cannot do is manipulate opinion. That's what people do, and that affects. You can see how around the United States, the view of Israel across the board, young and old, has become more and more negative over the years, especially among young people. And that's disturbing. That's disturbing because while Israel is imperfect, I think we should have a better conversation on it. And let me just tell you in a few words what we're doing over in IDSF before I move on. As Judy said, we are a forum of former commanders and officers, 50,000 members so far. We were founded by senior commanders in the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, police, to make Israel a safer place. And we are fighting to improve the public image of Israel, but also to advise and educate the Israeli public and decision makers about what we think is right to do on Israel's security. We publish literally dozens of reports. We brief government ministers, as you probably heard. We go around the country and talk to young people. This is the greatest pleasure of being an IDSF member, to talk to the younger generation. And we invite delegations from all over the world. And I'm happy to believe that we also met AFSI in your recent visit to Israel. So that is simply the greatest pleasure. And within the IDSF, we've got, of course, the David Institute, that I had the pleasure of establishing. We got 25 amazing researchers, and I'm so proud of the work that we were doing to make Israel a safer place. Back to our talk. I actually generated this one. It's fairly good, I have to admit. And this one, if you take a look and just try to take a closer look at what we're seeing here, basically a disinformation machine engineering the opinions of everyone. So it's just bought and paid for by all of these international bodies and by malign forces like the Iranians, some by Russia and China. They are generating this negative image. And so it spurs action. And you can see all these protests and all these actions and all these people who are absolutely sure what's going on. They have a very informed opinion about what's going on the ground while never being there. And it sways and it motivates. And so we see it across the board. Of course, around the media, there are, as I said, like in the Trump-Putin case, several ways to portray each thing. On the left, you see the United Nations, dozens fear dead in an Israeli airstrike on UNRWA school in Gaza. This is true. This is true. Israel bombed an UNRWA school in Gaza. What's also true is that they were feared dead. But as you can see on the right, IDF strikes Hamas compound located inside UNRWA school in Gaza. This is what actually happened. So the IDF did target a school, but what they forgot to tell you over in the UN is that the school was empty, and it only had 24 Hamas militants. And according to any international law, it's a perfectly legitimate target. And so you understand that just like the Austria visa cases, it is true to say that it's fivefold bigger, but it doesn't mean anything. All right, so they always keep telling you that the bombardment of schools, either they rely on a Hamas report, or they simply mislead you into believing that it was a school and not a structure used by Hamas. And then, as I said before, this is great media. This is great money, by the way. Lies are now being monetized. They are profitable. Wherever I look, I see how 20,000 children somehow died in Gaza, and all relying on this United Nations report that actually takes the data from Hamas. We are all certain there is mass starvation in Gaza, while the GHF, which we actually had the honor of writing a report on their activity, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This is a foundation funded by American veterans from the US military. And it distributed over 100 million meals in the past few months. So it's a very strange way to carry out a genocide, to fight a deadly enemy. And you saw in southern Israel, I'm sure you've been there, how terrible the October 7 massacre was. You try on the one hand to fight a vicious enemy, on the other hand to provide humanitarian conditions. Then, of course, it affects policy. I don't want to drag to all these texts, but this is a way for me to show you how, as you can see here, 17,000 children died. This is an official report by the United Kingdom's House of Commons. So this is basically the British Parliament, who had a committee who interviewed all sorts of experts, concluding that Israel is committing a genocide and the situation is intolerable. The only experts that they interviewed are Save the Children UK, is a highly biased organization, the British Islamic Medical Association, all sorts of people that, and I'm not going to tire you with all the names, name after name, that is a highly activist anti-Israeli. And from all of those experts, very diverse experts, they concluded the following. So you see how, but my point is that this is an official report by the British Parliament, and this creates, of course, policy recommendations. So I'm going back to my original point. Portrayal shapes perception. Perception shapes policy. If they do that, they mean they want to shape the way we vote, the way our governments work, the way we perceive Israel. Not only that, but they, like the United Nations, they appoint a committee. It's not just someone saying it. It's a neutral committee. So all of that put together sends me back to the good old Soviet times. They may be old, they're not good, but you are, I'm sure, all familiar with Pravda. This is the official newspaper of the Communist Party. It is ironically means truth. Pravda in Russian means truth. Nothing could be more ironic than that. But we are exposed to our own Pravda on a daily basis, in varying degrees. Some of the media are very fair. Some of the policymakers are very fair. But when it's not, you don't necessarily know about it. I believe that I showed you some of this last time around, but it's still great to revisit it. The Iranian regime knows very well how to manipulate us. And over the course of the war, if you remember when we spoke, I showed you these pictures of the so-called bombed Mossad headquarters over here on the left. This is not the Mossad headquarters. It's not with a single S, but it also doesn't look like that. And on the right, you allegedly see the bombed Ben Gurion airport. And none of that is true. But they still generated those pictures. Of course, on the right, you see this young pilot, the female pilot, that has been captured in Iran. The only problem is this is a Chilean pilot, picture taken in 2021. Fairly bizarre. On the left, you see a pilot that was downed in Iran, an Israeli pilot. Of course, it's not true, but there was a video circulating of a pilot, activating the parachute over the skies of Iran. But what is the point here? Why do that? Because they know that public opinion matters. They know how much it matters. If you try to affect the morale of the population, try and affect the way it thinks, and even more importantly, the way it feels, this is how you spur. And of course, from Russia to Iran, they've been doing it on a daily basis. The Iranians are also doing it to sway their own people, to rally them behind the regime. I don't know if you saw the very viral video of this news anchor from Iran that during the broadcast, the building was bombed by the Israeli Air Force. This is far from being an innocent news station. This is the official Sada Sima. This is the Iranian official broadcasting network funded by the IRGC, declared by the United States as a terrorist organization. $400 million per year, fairly impressive budget. And while on air, of course, she escaped the studio. She became a national heroine in Iran. And this is part of the propaganda effort. Same for this. This is not in Jerusalem. This is in Tehran. When they send out these protesters, they don't happen to be female. They know what they're doing in the Iranian regime. They want to portray women as great champions of the Iranian regime and how they fight for Jerusalem. This is all part of the propaganda machine, right? And this guy knows it. This guy knows it. Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, he made a speech to the folks you see on the left side. These are, of course, encampments in US campuses. And what he told them is that right now you form a branch of the resistance front. You form a branch of the resistance front. Basically, you are resisting on our behalf as well. And indeed, the Iranians made sure to, through various means, to channel funds and money to the United States, whether it's mosques, whether these are academic centers, whether these are NGOs, all over the place. And these organizations, in turn, organize rallies and protests, and they do what they do best, smearing Israel's name. Little do they know, some of these students, that behind what they're doing, they probably are innocently thinking that they are protesting for human rights. Little do they know that behind many of these efforts is Iranian money, Palestinian money, Russian money, Chinese money. But this is a way for them to sow instability, to destabilize the United States. And of course, Hamas, the master of propaganda. This is, of course, I deliberately didn't show the hostages themselves, but this is the so-called ceremony of the hostage release back in January. And before releasing them and putting them very cruelly on stage and making them wave and all that, they made the Red Cross come and sort of sign the papers and stamp them. Check out the guys on the back, right? Always remember these cameras. First, this looks like extremely, I never had such a camera before. These are highly professional lenses, and this is supposed to be a war zone under siege with deep starvation and genocide. How the heck did they put their hands on these cameras? And where is the print that printed all this backstage? So you see how we are all being manipulated. And of course, as you see, they write in Hebrew and in English. Why? People in Gaza speak Arabic. Well, because the message is not to the people of Gaza, the message is to us, to the Israelis, to Americans. Basically say, we are the next day. There's plenty of typos and grammar mistakes there, but these are minor details here. And they use it, as I said, but going back to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, this is the way they've been fighting, either making you believe that so many people die in Gaza. Of course, many people are being killed in Gaza, but I wouldn't put my money on these figures, exactly how many women and children and so on. And of course, journalists would die in Gaza. Of course, that's what we heard as well. Only that, true, this guy is registered as a journalist, but he's also a member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and here is his wage slip. And he also participated in October 7, as you can see on the left, kidnapping and murdering Israelis. So all I'm saying is that we are all exposed to this, but it applies way beyond Israel. I'm sure you're familiar with this gentleman, Mark Zuckerberg. He's the president of Meta. And after President Trump got reelected, he had this famous video where he explained how they're not going to arbitrate truth anymore. whether it's on Israel, whether it's on Ukraine, on COVID, on any other topic. He says that it is not our job to be arbiters of truth, and we're not going to label these posts and, as disinformation or fact check posts and all that. We're simply going to let users decide while, combating. And I can tell you, as someone who worked for a company that tackled malicious content online, there is a lot of bad content online, and we want to fight that. We want to find human trafficking and all these things, but we don't want to let a handful of people control what is true and what is false. We want to make our own decision, and that sends me back to the great Abraham Lincoln, who said, "When the conduct of man is designed to be influenced, persuasion, kind, unassuming persuasion, should ever be adopted. It is an all and true maxim that a drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall." And he said, when you want to persuade a man, when you want to persuade voters, you don't explain to them, you sway them. All right? You make them feel closer to you. And what are those photos of children suffering in Gaza supposed to make everyone feel? Of course, empathy. But then they don't tell the full picture, how Israel is fighting the war of the West, how Israel is trying to protect the population and invite it into humanitarian zones away from the war zone while it is fighting Hamas, how Israeli soldiers are dying by the week, falling in battle because they are taking extra precaution. The Israeli families are grieving, and they hear these 3 knocks on the door, and they understand what it means. That their son has fallen in battle, killed in action. And so all these things are to say that there is a lot to say about the situation. And of course, it's complicated, but we're all exposed to this mass manipulation that is being weaponized by Iran, Hamas, Russia, China, and many other forces. And as we are looking forward, perhaps what you can do is, one, to be aware, to be skeptical, to take, you see that jar of salt back in your cupboard, take a huge, not a grain of salt, maybe a handful of salt every time you watch the media, whatever media this is, and every time you are being quoted with figures about what's going on in Gaza and 20,000 children, all these figures. And when people are extremely opinionated, those who never visited the region or simply heard a podcaster or an influencer say something and they decided to echo it, and so on and so forth. Of course, everyone, and that's the beauty about America, that everyone is entitled to their opinion. That's okay. But we also need to be aware that people try to manipulate it, and people try to use us as pawns to achieve their goals. This is exactly how some students in U.S. campuses end up, establishing encampments and living in tents, waving the Palestine or Hamas or Hezbollah flags right in the heart of the United States. So all these things are to teach us that information is a dimension of war, and we should be aware of that. And I think part of our job is to spread the message, to come to Israel, to see the truth as it is, and to really also support those efforts to tackle and expose these claims, because the more we do it, the safer our society becomes. And with that, toda rabba, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I think that everybody on this call is aware of the fact that there is a lot of disinformation, but we're wondering, and I have a question from Barbara Katai about basically about this topic. What is Israel doing to counteract all the disinformation that comes out from the Ministry of Health and other sources?
Well, I can tell you that we IDSF, we do the best we can. We go to the media. I was in Newsmax not long ago, and my boss Amir Avivi is on Fox News, and he's BBC and CNN and MSNBC, all these places. And we write articles, and especially we meet government officials to write some education material, especially in Israel, to try to advise them on what to do next. And of course, we educate the next generation. This is great. I don't know if it's enough. And I think Israel is losing public opinion, not because it's wrong, because I feel that we're not targeting the right audiences with the right message, and we are trying to explain rather than persuade. That's a very different, these are two very different things. My college professor once asked me, I wanted to sound smart, and it was in French, it was in Paris, so I said, il faut convaincre, persuader, tout ça means we need to convince and persuade. And he stopped and asked me, what's the difference between convince and persuade? And of course, I had no clue. And then he very wisely explained that to convince someone is to explain to them, to present the stats, to present the facts and the figures, and giving this rational argument. And to persuade someone, you don't need any of that. Just show them a picture, or make them meet a person, or visit a place, and then they are swayed, and then they feel attached. They feel attached. I don't know. I have a lot of criticism to what the UK and what it's doing to Israel, but honest to God, I just love British culture, and I enjoy fish and chips, and I watch The Crown, and I at least was as a kid heavily addicted to Harry Potter. So this is swaying. Right, makes me feel an emotional attachment to it. Like every time you go to Jerusalem and you don't need to be explained why Jerusalem is important. Just feel it, So this is a big part of it, and I think in that you have to do a much better effort.
Well, thank you for that pitch for our missions, because we definitely do feel when we go on our missions. I just need to visit Judea and Samaria to realize how important they are to the Jewish world. But are resources being allocated by the government of Israel we're the startup nation, or you're the startup nation, and there's so much available technologically. Is anything being done? I applaud Habithonistim for what they do. Is there anything that the government is doing?
Right. The government does many things, and it's recently allocated some more budgets to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Diaspora, and to be honest, there is a lot of efforts. There is the National Advocacy Headquarters, when their mission is to centralize all these advocacy efforts. They do a lot of things. Whether it's necessarily working, that's a different question. And this is my view that sometimes those people who are right, who have the truth on their side, it's a one thing, but it's a totally different thing to know how to persuade. And in that sense, we're not doing a lot of things. We're not going to college campuses and take, not the usual suspects, not Israelis like me necessarily, but take, I don't know, a young Latino guy from the suburbs who is not Jewish, but has been to Israel, and now he's explaining to his folks in the terminology they understand why they need to support Israel, or at least why Hamas is bad, and whatever's going on in Gaza. There's tons of things you can do, okay? To go to influencers and to debate and to prepare people before they go on interviews. That's a very wise thing to do. And all these things that just shape public opinion. And again, just letting the IDF spokesperson, who is very talented, or Netanyahu, who is also very talented, to let them speak in front of the camera, that is one thing. But you don't necessarily need that all the time. You need to have one photo in Times Square, New York, or you need to have this, this magazine article about this woman who survived captivity, and this is her story. We have to do much more of that, in my opinion.
All right. It would be great to see numbers countering the numbers put out by the UN, but I suppose it's very difficult to compare.
Mindy has her hand raised, so.
Oh, Mindy. Mindy, you want to talk? I'm going to ask you to unmute. We usually do this by writing, but Mindy, I know you like to talk. You're not on. I'm asking you to unmute. You have to unmute yourself.
I did unmute, but then they muted me again. First of all, I know Yissachar and I know IDSF, and I'm trying to get General Amir Avivi to speak here in our synagogue. But my question is, what are we doing enough in the United States to fight this disinformation? I don't feel we're doing enough. We keep blaming Israel for the PR, but they do PR, and we don't do enough with it. We've had one major protest in Washington since the beginning of the war. I just wrote to a lot of heads of state, William Daroff, local UJA, after they gave $1 million already, local federations, asking about doing a massive protest all over the world simultaneously in support of Israel against these countries, these politicians who are saying that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state in September if there's no ceasefire. It won't happen because we, thank God, have President Trump in office that will veto it, but it doesn't matter. We are not doing enough all over the world to support Israel and put our story out there. I also know that you didn't want to show the films of what happened on October 7th. They were shown to some, but if it's shown, it would garner more support. I'm not sure it shouldn't have been shown to more people. I think we're losing it because of the images that are coming out of Gaza and not reminding about the images of October 7th. And it's not enough for me to see them at every dinner I go to, or I've seen them privately because I'm who I am. What are we doing? Where are the Jewish leaders here? I don't feel we're doing enough.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you that I think others should do as well, not just Israel. I think the United States does a lot, especially the United States administration, especially in the past 6 months. But there is a lot of, I would say there's a lot of effort yet to be done by people who know what's true and either are too fearful to speak or don't want to take the risk. I'll just give you an example. Like early in the war, if you remember, there was a big protest in Washington, D.C., a big rally, a big demonstration, and both Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer came over. And that was a great display of unity. You wouldn't have that today, let me safely assume. Why? Because it's not politically expedient, because it's inconvenient, because it's not politically correct, because it's controversial, because, there are so many terrible pictures coming out of Gaza, as you said. Well, yes, this is a war zone. This is a war zone. You have terrible pictures. You also have pictures of soldiers helping out elderly Palestinians to make it safely to the car, and American contractors handing out 100 million meals to Palestinian children. So you got all sorts of pictures. You choose to, there were pretty terrible pictures in Iraq and Afghanistan, in all fairness, and many other places around the world. It doesn't mean that they are right and the United States is wrong. On the contrary, it means that people are not usually used to this kind of very highly contested debate. What I think people should do, at least around the world, maybe in this country as well, is first come to Israel. And I know you guys are doing this magnificently, and talk to people. And I think it's also important to support efforts to show the truth in creative ways, to sway the population, to tell about these video, like TikTok influencers or magazines or even cultural events, those events that make the population being emotionally attached. And yes, as a David Institute, as a research, like as a think tank, it is our effort to also spread the truth and the stats and the research and all the true numbers and figures. And I think, in all fairness, I think that the debate should be more balanced. It is not because it is so profitable. It just, it's very beneficial and it's monetized to go out and smear Israel in public. It's great ratings, it's great traffic, but it does a lot of damage. And I know that Jewish communities in the United States are suffering. Jewish communities in Europe are suffering. This is the result. I mean, this is maybe great media, great clickbait, but that's the result. We in Israel suffer. Jewish communities in the United States and around the world are suffering because of this war of information. I just hope this changes.
All right, we have a couple of questions that have come in just now. Robert Olesh is asking, is disinformation a big problem in Israel?
Yes, it is. And if I mention that 20,000 children figure around the world is problematic, some people in Israel use it. And it is normalized sometimes to say, in my view, that the Israeli government wants to eternalize the war or to wage war for its own political will. We are not a political organization. I'm just as an observer. I'm saying it's normalized. Doesn't mean that it's okay to say it. I think any just as a common sense kind of way, any politician would love to win this war and get this finished and as quickly as possible. I also think it's normalized to smear a lot of the efforts done by the Haredi community, the Orthodox community, who definitely should recruit and draft in much bigger numbers. But some disinformation efforts about them are rampant, and on the contrary, and vice versa. On many other ethnic groups or social groups in Israel. So that all these figures that I showed you are sometimes used by Israeli activists to sort of oppose the war efforts. But I think we're all kind of susceptible to disinformation in a way, whether we know it or not, and wherever we are. So it's really our role to be aware of it, first of all, and then to know how to identify it and combat it. Absolutely.
Thank you. Andrea Spindell, who leads the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, looks like you know her, asks, major media in Canada are all aligned against Israel. Public broadcasters are the worst. Can IDSF arrange to meet with the editorial boards rather than contradict Indian stories?
Absolutely. Let's do that. I'm happy to do it. And I think we bring an added value because many people are, activists, and they're great. I think the added value we bring to the table, if to speak just about us, is to back it up with being security members and former generals and security experts, and we are extremely present in the Israeli and international media, and I think we have the best tools to confront it, and also not just to react, but to initiate. So maybe to initiate our own stories, not just to react to existing stories.
Okay.
With regard, just a follow-up on that. The film festival, the International Film Festival,
right. In Toronto, right?
Toronto, yeah, refused to run and has now said they will run the one film, but forced a name change so that not even the creative piece is allowable, citing the lack of permission from Hamas for their slaughter videos, which they posted themselves in a public forum, which made them publicly available, citing a lack of permission from them. So, you start to put all these little pieces together, and for me, it feels, it's like Sisyphus here. We're rolling up the mountain there, and I'm not feeling that we have a lot of leeway. We've also ignored the fact that Arabs have been allowed to buy seats and do mind melds with the students on our universities when we start to talk about that. So, I don't know if you have suggestions. What can we do?
We definitely have some big problems there. I just want to ask one question that Sherry Bolliker put forth, which I think is really important. Does IDSF deal with the Jewish legacy organizations who have not protected us and done a very poor job in the United States with media, and also listen to the Gaza narrative?
Right. So we try not to confront them directly because it's more, in my opinion, it's more effective to generate your own story as opposed to just go around with a towel and try to dry out all the puddles around the floor. I think we should be, as my boss likes to say, to the heroes of our own story. Not to go around and apologize and correct people and confront people, especially when they're Jewish, because it's just too painful for me personally to do it. But we had the chance privately to do it in some occasions. And I have to say, not all of these organizations are profoundly genuine, like Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP.
But that's a legacy organization. That's a organization.
Yeah, it's just
we're talking about Federation. We're talking about the organizations the huge ones.
Right. APAC and J Street, I guess, and all these. Okay, we don't do that publicly. It's not something we do. And when they are wrong, we make sure to let them know. but that's their decision. We can only talk about ourselves. And I'm much more concerned when some of these claims get traction by our own folk than elsewhere. It's just more painful to me personally. But as I said, even some people in Israel get their hands on this false information, whether willingly, whether consciously or not, they are busy propagating it. The two-state solution is the only solution. 20,000 children died in Gaza. Israel deliberately starves the population. All of this is not true. And we can keep fighting it all day, or we can, alongside doing it, generate our own story. And I think it's much more interesting.
Can I ask a question quick?
Barbara, I have one more question I'm going to ask, and we're almost out of time. I did ask your question already. Judy Schwartz wants to know, are you working with Honest Reporting or any of the organizations that try to put forth the true information?
Right. So we work with the media in many occasions. We give them exclusivity on our content. We do it with Newsweek. We do it with Epoch Times. We do it with many other organizations around the world. And we domestically, even in Israel, we organized 3 security summits, one with Israel Hayom, it's fairly centrist, one with Ynet, and one with Channel 14. So across the spectrum, we try to bring our opinions to light to whoever public. And I want our profile in the United States to be much more salient. We are on all these shows. We came to Newsmax several times, and Fox News and CNN and many other places. I think we should definitely, absolutely work more with this Honest Reporting, quote unquote, organizations. And that's our mission. We should do it much more, absolutely. Thank
you so much. We're reaching the end of our time. For those people who want to stay on, who have the time to stay on for a little while, I'm going to end the recording, but we can stay on if you're available for an extra couple of minutes, that would be great. If you're not, we understand.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm here.